Salutations everybody, it is Matty here today with an Outer Worlds news update, and this time around it's more about the universe, less about the gameplay side of things. So we're going to be going all in on that lore and covering ourselves in it. It's going to be a beautiful thing, but in all seriousness, if you're looking to get fully involved in the Outer Worlds universe, this is the perfect video for you to learn all you need to know about the universe of this title. So let's get into it. This information comes from GameInformer.com, and I summarized generally their article into my own set of notes. Earth is at the center, already established with money-churning companies and looking to expand throughout the rest of the galaxy. Earth's idea was to purchase a planet, create a corporate utopia, and control others' lives. There are also other colonies mentioned outside of Halcyon, such as one very rich man who bought a colony all to himself and then sealed it off where no one has visited said colony for 100 years. Also, in the terms of space travel for the Outer Worlds universe, Kane describes it as the following. If you go from one velocity to another and not occupy the ones in between, you can really get really close up to the speed of light and then jump over the light speed barrier. They found a way to do it. What's weird is that when you do skip over light speed, you're in some other weird space. Everything's gray, you can't see anything, and you can't turn. And naturally that leads to issues they mention, and that issue does happen to you in the beginning of the game, explaining what happened to the ship called the Hope. What I love and what stuck out to me right off the bat is I love titles that have a focus of creating a utopia. One of my favorite series of all time is BioShock, and that's because there was a utopia designed to be created underneath in the sea and also up above in the clouds, and I think both settings were executed perfectly. In the terms of the Outer Worlds, they're creating a corporate utopia where all the corporations control everybody's lives, which is why we've seen in certain bits of dialogue people representing the companies and embracing that lifestyle.
Oh, before I forget, Auntie Cleo's makes the best pharmaceuticals in Halcyon. Better than nature.
We'll get into that a little bit more because there is more details on it, but I like the idea that Earth is at the center of all this, already good to go, and is existing in this universe, and that they're now trying to expand by traveling to the edges of the galaxy and creating their pretty much dream world, right? But it doesn't seem it's going to work out that way. Monarch, otherwise known as Terra 1, orbits a gas giant known as Olympus. Human life wasn't sustainable here and also caused mutations in a sense to creatures, making it quite dangerous to live on. Monarch is described as the bigger open wide play space compared to the rest of the game. There are 3 to 4 little towns that you can walk between and eventually fly to when their landing pads are unlocked upon discovery. Terra 2 is Halcyon, and also the host of the corporations where most of their control lies, because since Monarch is pretty much falling apart, they don't really have much of a grip there. A lot of people haven't embraced being a part of these companies, but there are flickers of those who are no longer consumed by the corporate greed and have broken away. Lastly, we've seen Edgewater and Roseway in the Outer Worlds, but the article mentions Byzantium, which is defined as a gilded city of the well-to-do where every colonist wished they could live. So for starters, we've seen Monarch before. It's the almost glowing sea-esque planet in the game where it looks like there will be many creatures there attempting to kill us, and that this is where we're going to do a lot of the exploration, looting, shooting, and I think it's going to be less storytelling focused. However, our first batch of gameplay details is in here when they talk about how it is that bigger open wide play space, and on top of that there are 3 to 4 towns that you can eventually fly to. So now we know how flying to places in this game works. Eventually you can unlock a landing pad upon discovery. When that happens, fast travel is pretty much enabled, I'd say. And just like any utopian focused game where that's slowly starting to crumble, we notice that they also mentioned that while most people are buying into the idea of this being consumed by corporations, there are people who are not about that life and have stepped away from it and are starting to disassemble said utopia. But what really has my attention more than anything, what I want to see the most, is Byzantium. That sounds like a really awesome place. Apparently it is also considered a gated community, so this seems like, yes, the very high and mighty shall live here. And I'm curious what characters we'll encounter, how it looks compared to the rest, because for example, we've seen Roseway before and how it doesn't necessarily look like what someone would consider a poor place to live in, but it's also not necessarily high class, middle of the road, so to say. So I'm curious to see what Byzantium would be like, and I hope that's something that they do save for the launch of this game, not something that they spoil right away, because I do want to have some surprises when it comes to planets. I imagine we are going to see Monarch down the line. That makes the most sense, but stuff like Byzantium, which doesn't seem to be a major focus or could be maybe reserved for the late game, I do hope that they hold off on that. Our last chunk of notes: Terra 2 and Monarch hold the majority of content, but you will visit various other smaller planets. There is a mention of an asteroid called Scylla, which holds some labs and transmitting stations mostly abandoned. There is Tartarus, that is similar to Venus, yet worse off, which seems to be a theme. Tartarus also hosts a maximum security prison. Other planets discussed are Typhon, which is an ice planet where the first ship in the beginning of the game that I did mention that's having issues and you're pulled out of the cryopod is now stationed there. Eridanos, which is a gas giant being mined for additional resources, and Hephaestus, a tiny but resource-loaded planet nearing the sun. Interestingly enough, there is a Greek mythology theme here with Eridanos, which is the river of Hades, and then also Hephaestus, who is the god of fire. Perhaps it's just used thematically, but I do wonder if there's some form of connection. I also find that Scylla is an interesting selection for an asteroid name, because that's not one that makes sense right off the bat. For example, to have a planet named Hephaestus after the god of fire, and that planet is next to a sun, it's probably incredibly hot there, so yes, it makes sense, name it after some type of god of fire. Eridanos, a gas giant, sure, the river of Hades, why not? But according to Wikipedia, Scylla was a monster that lived on one side of a narrow channel of water opposite to her counterpart, Charybdis. The two sides of the strait were within an arrow's range of each other, so close that sailors attempting to avoid Charybdis would pass dangerously close to Scylla, and vice versa. Quite honestly, a lot of my familiarity with these gods, goddesses, and so on are from the game Smite, which I played a disgusting amount of, but these are probably small little areas that I imagine we'll eventually explore. I don't think that, for example, they'll mention Tartarus, a maximum security prison, being something that exists unless we end up there. I don't know about these other tinier planets, but the main thing we can definitely take away from this section here is that the majority of the content will be on Halcyon and Monarch itself, of course, but there are various other smaller planets that we will head to. I imagine some are going to be for companion missions, kind of like Mass Effect 2, but I also imagine some will be to further the story itself. Obsidian has been sure to get the information out that this game isn't necessarily gigantic in the terms of scale, so I don't know how many of what I've listed just now will be available to explore. Will we be able to land on Scylla? Will we be able to go to Typhon or Eridanos, Hephaestus? I imagine those planets, yes, but I don't know necessarily about something like a Scylla or a Tartarus. Maybe they're just there for lore's sake. I don't know how much they paint the universe for us through conversations, text logs, and computer terminals versus we actually physically get to see. And we also have to consider that they did mention they'd love to create new planets for DLC, so perhaps these are planets that they're gauging interest on, that they'll see what people really attach themselves to once the game launches, and afterwards what makes sense narratively, what they didn't use up too much, what assets are left over, and then use those for future content. So there is the possibility that maybe we visit those for DLC. But anyway, that is all of the brand new information I have for you guys on the universe of the Outer Worlds. I do hope you enjoyed and took something away from it. I know there's only a minimal amount of gameplay details here, but I still think it's pretty exciting to get an idea of what kind of universe we're exploring, learn about some of the planets, and so on. So let me know what you think about this in the comments down below. Other than that, follow me on Twitter, like me on Facebook. Those links are in the description down below, along with my Patreon. Do consider supporting that, as it fuels all the content I create here. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.